Good afternoon. Welcome to the Midday Mull for Thursday, the 30th of September. With McShane, today we read 1 Kings chapter 2, the story of David dying and King Solomon taking over the throne. It's a bit of a bloodthirsty chapter with what appears to be revenge. Some of it is deserved execution. Some of it just appears to be Solomon shoring up his kingdom. While it's an uneasy read in the 21st century, I dare say that 3.5 millennia ago, it was probably par for the course for kings of the day. But what struck me as I read through it was verse 26. And there we read, "To Abiathar the priest, the king said, 'Go back to your fields in Anathoth. You deserve to die. But I will not put you to death now, because you carried the ark of the sovereign Lord before my father David and shared all my father's hardships.' So Solomon removed Abiathar from the priesthood of the Lord, fulfilling the word the Lord had spoken at Shiloh about the house of Eli." And what struck me about that was that this was a word that God spoke through Samuel, when Samuel was a young boy. We know the story of him sleeping in the tabernacle and hearing God speak and thinking it was Eli. And eventually Eli says, "Speak, Lord, your servant's listening," which he did. And God said Eli's family is going to be driven out of the priesthood. After that, Samuel grew up to be a man, and then he anointed King Saul. King Saul reigned for about 27 years, more or less. And after King Saul, David became king, and he reigned for 40 years. So you have a time of about almost 70 years from when Saul started reigning, plus then a couple of years for Samuel, who was a young boy. So possibly 75 years before this word had been spoken, and finally now it is fulfilled. And I was wondering whether the house of Eli had completely forgotten about it, or had written it off and thought, well, God said that all those years ago, but that clearly doesn't apply. And what it said to me is that God's word will always be fulfilled. We expect it in our instant age to be fulfilled immediately, and we so often lack patience. But God has infinite patience, and he doesn't work on our time frames and in our time schemes. He fulfills his purpose in his time. And so that is, for me, it's a call for patience and a continuing trust in God, that we know what God has promised, he will fulfill. We hopefully will see what he promises us, but sometimes it might only come in a generation or possibly 2 generations' time. But God's word does stand. And what he said to the house of Eli was ultimately fulfilled 7 odd decades later. So we can keep trusting in God. And even if when we're waiting for things and praying for things and we don't see them, we can keep trusting in God because he does fulfill his word. And that is an encouragement and a source of blessing.